No, I sent Aaron a whole bunch of documents this morning that are actually largely written for NIH reviewers. So you'll have an idea of what the reviewers are saying when they're planning on writing the review. I think somebody must not be muted because there's a lot of background noise when somebody's not. I don't know if Aaron can fix that or just people can check to make sure you're muted. So what I first want to, if you're not familiar with NIH scoring, it is essentially a top-down scoring system, which once you get used to it, it makes sense. But I think sometimes people get confused that a low number is a good score. So 1 means the grant is fabulous. 9 means the grant has significant and profound weaknesses. And the when a NIH grant is scored, you will get an awful lot of numbers back. But the only one that actually matters in funding decisions is what's called the overall impact score. So the overall impact scores of 1, 2, and 3 are considered high impact to the field. 4, 5, 6 are considered medium impact, and 7, 8, and 9 are considered low impact. For most NIH-based mechanisms, realistically, to get funded, you need to have a 1, 2, or 3. There is a small chance of getting funded with a 4, 5, and 6, but there's almost no chance of getting a grant from the NIH directly with a 7, 8, or 9. Now, the thing you need to understand about impact is that it's meant to be impact on the field. So you can have a very important, highly significant project, but if they're not convinced that you as an investigator can carry it out, or your institution has the resources to let you carry it out, or the research plan is not going to answer the highly significant question, your score is going to be significantly dinged. So it's basically an entire package. It includes things such as significance, which is the importance of the question being asked to the field. Investigator, basically your potential as an applicant. That investigator is usually judged within a certain type career level. So you can get a 1 as investigator, as a brand new investigator, if your record to date suggests that you have a lot of potential. You can also get a 1 as investigator to being a Nobel laureate, and everything in between. So it's really, is the investigator well prepared and likely to be able to do the project? Then we have innovation. Innovation is that it's really new. Is it using new methodologies? Is it looking at answering the problem in a way that 5 other people in the field aren't already doing? Approach, are you doing this? Are you answering this question with good science using methods that will allow you to answer the question? Environment, that certainly is your institution set up to allow you to do the project. And so the things that I think we have a problem with somebody not being muted again. But the thing to keep in mind is that the overall impact is not simply an average of those criteria scores. The reviewer has a lot of latitude in weighting what parts of those criteria scores are the most important. NIH has done an analysis of this, and they found that the overall impact score and the approach score correlate the strongest by a great deal. But that's largely because almost everybody applying for NIH funding are well-qualified investigators coming from good environments. So the score driver that is left is really approach to decide what the overall impact score really is. Okay. So now, how do you interpret that and how are they calculated? So the grant itself is scored on a 1 to 9 scale. but when you get your reviews back, you're going to see your reviews given on a 10 to 90 scale, with 10 being basically a perfect grant with no flaws, and 90 being the worst possible score. And applications really only get 90s if the reviewers feel that the application has absolutely no virtues. Over the years, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of NIH grants get reviewed. I don't know if I've ever seen a grant whose preliminary score was a 90. Now, how do you go from 1 to 9 to 10 to 90? Is that grants are usually assigned 3 reviewers, and each reviewer has will give the grant an impact score of 1 to 9. Now, for CTR reviews, all of the grants are discussed. And that what they're discussed in front of is all of the reviewers assigned all of the grants. So I believe, if I remember correctly, the last CTR review, there were 15 or 20 people who were assigned to do the reviews, that each of the reviewers probably did 3 to 4 grants, and each grant got 3 reviewers. So that essentially, as during the study section meeting, that the grants have a preliminary score from each assigned reviewer. Then the person who's assigned as the primary reviewer presents the grant, gives their preliminary score. The second reviewer says they either agree with the primary reviewer or they give other or additional interpretations. The same thing happens with reviewer 3. The 3 reviewers have now heard each other's scores, and they will often modify and adjust their scores in light of not just their own opinion, but the opinions of the other 3 assigned reviewers. Then the grant is open to discussion for the entire panel of 20 people. They all weigh in. Everybody is thinking about what the final score is. Then each study section member, all 20 people in the room who heard the discussion and read the written reviews, will then give an independent score. So in this scenario, 3 people read your grant in depth, 17 people heard the discussion of the 3 people who read your grant in depth, but all 20 people vote. And then all 20 scores are averaged and multiplied, and the final average is multiplied by 10, and that gives the impact factor for that grant. Now, for CTR, since all grants are discussed, you will see scores ranging from 10, up to realistically probably 75 or 80. And however, for an NIH study section, usually you'll only see scores back from 10 to 60, because in a NIH study section, they're reviewing 100 grants. They will only discuss grants in the top 50% of initial scores. So just to give you a feel for how the decision is made. So now when you get your reviews back, you will see the review in parts. You will see your overall impact score. Now that's really the number that is important, but you'll then have your grant will be assessed on every criteria score. And that'll include investigator, environment, significance, innovation, research plan. If it's a training grant, such as CTR, pilot grants, there will be a score on sponsors, collaborators, mentors, your mentoring plan. If it's a fellowship, if you're applying to the NIH, there's also scoring on training potential and often institutional commitments to training. Now, one thing you have to understand is that for an NIH study section, the written comments are usually bullet points, and they're supposed to explain what your score, why you got the score you got. Now, for an NIH study section, these comments are often, they're not written to you, they're written to the people who are deciding funding. And they sometimes may not even tell you what was really wrong with your grant, but justify the score. Now, CTR is a little different. Even the fact you're writing a CTR pilot means that you are in our pool of young investigators that we want to mentor. So the comments tend to be a lot more informative and try to mentor you if you didn't get a good score on how to get a good score on the next round of applications. But just be aware that in general, NIH grant reviews are not meant to help you do better on the next round, even though you will find that is different for the CTR reviews, because everything you are touching with CTR, our job is to mentor you so that you understand the process better, each thing you apply for, with the goal of having everybody who is interested in applying to CTR funding get funded eventually. All right, so the thing that you have to understand is that impact scores do not necessarily, that if you tell you your chances of being funded, and I'll get to that in a minute, but they also can give you some hint about whether the reviewers are agreeing. Because if your impact score ends in a 0, it probably means that all 3 of the reviewers that read your grant agree 100% on the score. So they, let's say, all gave your grant a 2. They convinced the rest of the study section the grant was worth a 2. Everybody in the room voted a 2, so you got a 0 ending score. However, if your score is a 23, it probably means that there was some disagreement. Some people gave it a 2, some people gave it a 3, and different reviewers in the room gave it a score in between that. Now, when I say that the impact score does not tell you your chances of being funded, certainly if you have a bad impact score, you are not going to get funded. However, that for NIH, there is a calculation done called percentile. Percentile is basically how your grant stacks up against the competition. It's not unusual for like a grant study section reviewing 100 grants to give no ones. They just don't give perfect scores or perfect grants. So from one study section, a 23 may be an absolutely fabulous score. For another study section, a 23 could put you in the top third or something. And so percentile means that how does your grant stack up against everybody else who has reviewed? And while CTR definitely works that way, is that your score is being compared to all of the scores given in CTR review. But there's also that your final score is also based on, let me get to here. All right, so this is some NIH stuff. That your score is going to definitely be helpful, but CTR has specific priorities. So that the people who are making the funding decisions are going to be balancing how your percentile and how good your score of your grant was versus the priorities of CTR. So that if your grant scored well, but not at the tippy top, but you were the only application that checked the box for a certain CTR funding priority, you have a pretty good chance of getting the grant. However, if your application fits into the scope of CTR, but it's not in a high CTR funding priority, having a nice solid score, you might not get funded. And to get funded from CTR, you might have to have a really top score. CTR funds research in a very broad area of things, but just keep in mind that your chances of getting funded with a particular score are going to depend on whether or not your research fits exactly a CTR funding priority or not. And if you read the RFA for CTR, it really says that. It says that there are high priority areas of funding, but that then there are also, but that they're open to funding a broad range of research. And, so, if you have a couple competing projects, you're trying to decide what to write on, definitely write and one of them fits exactly CTR funding priorities and the other one not so much, write the one that fits exactly CTR funding priorities. All of that said, plenty of people have been funded by CTR whose research is biomedical in nature, but isn't precisely under one of the top funding criteria. So that shouldn't discourage you from applying. It's just something you have to understand, that having a good score does not guarantee that you're going to be funded. So I think that puts me at 10 minutes, so I don't want to go over. That I will stop the presentation now and take questions if there's any questions.